In 1,850 seconds, New Orleans, a wealthy woman named Madame Laloire lived in total seclusion. For 40 years, she wore a heavy black velvet mask that never came off. Her own husband, a respected doctor, enforced this absolute silence. The mask concealed not a costume, but a terrifying secret. Was she suffering from a disfiguring medical curse, or was she hiding the shameful mark of a crime she fled overseas? Over the next 60 minutes, we investigate the woman behind the velvet and why her identity had to be erased. Dr. Laloire was not a recluse. He was a prominent and highly respected physician in New Orleans. He maintained a thriving practice and was known for his calm, professional demeanor. This is the first paradox of the story. A man whose profession was dedicated to healing and revealing disease was the primary keeper of this dark secret. Why didn't he simply cure whatever ailment Madame Laloire had? Or, if he couldn't, why not reveal the medical truth to quiet the rumors? The answer is that Dr. Laloire was the gatekeeper of his family's image. He was the one who controlled the narrative, ensuring that his own public standing and thus the family's wealth remained untouched. If his wife's condition was medically horrifying, the doctor would be able to diagnose it. If it was a moral stain, he would have to hide it. Let's look at the first documented instances of the mask. The mask was not a temporary measure, it was a permanent fixture. It's universally described as being made of black velvet, dense enough to completely obscure any outline of the face. Crucially, contemporary accounts state it was secured into her hair or with heavy clasps, making its removal impossible without time and effort. This was not a veil, it was a shroud. The mask dictated her entire existence. She moved only at night, in a shrouded carriage with curtains drawn tight, always accompanied by her husband or a trusted servant. She never received visitors and never hosted guests. Her world was reduced to the walls of the Laloire mansion, a grand but imposing house known for its perpetual gloom. The house itself became a silent character in the mystery. Neighbors described the windows as being constantly shuttered, even on the brightest Louisiana days. The air within must have been thick with the heat of the climate and the weight of the decades-long secret. This was a voluntary prison, a fortress designed not to keep people out, but to trap one woman in. Her routine was astonishingly rigid. Servants would bring her meals on trays, which she would take only after locking herself in a small private chamber. No one was ever allowed to see her eat. Every detail of daily life, from the way she ate to the way she slept, was meticulously engineered to ensure the mask never came off in the presence of a witness. This obsession with total concealment is what truly elevates the story from a strange illness to a Gothic nightmare. The secrecy was so extreme that it immediately suggested something far worse than just a facial scar. It hinted at a secret she could not control and which her husband could not risk exposing. It's around this time, as the 1,860 seconds approached, that the local journalists began to run out of polite ways to describe her. They consciously reached back into history to find a suitable comparison, landing on the notorious French prisoner, the Man in the Iron Mask. This name, meant to evoke intrigue and historical paranoia, stuck. It transformed Madame Laloire from a reclusive society woman into a figure of dark legend. But the term Iron Mask is misleading. Her mask was velvet, yes, but the intent was the same as the historical prisoner: to erase the identity of a person whose face held a truth too dangerous for the world to see. It's an act of social and psychological imprisonment, enforced by a loving yet brutally controlling husband. Let's pause and consider the possibilities. If Dr. Laloire, a skilled physician, was unable to remedy the situation after all these years, then the reason behind the mask must fall into one of two major categories. Theory A: catastrophic physical disfigurement. Something so profoundly horrifying that it would instantly ruin the family's standing and perhaps provoke a terrifying public reaction. Think less of a scar and more of a total biological transformation. Theory B: concealment of identity or crime. This suggests the mask was less about what she looked like and more about who she was or what she had done. A political exile, a fugitive from justice, or a witness to a crime so terrible that her exposure would mean ruin or death. The sheer permanence of the mask leads us to believe the latter is far more likely. A simple medical problem rarely requires 40 years of total social erasure. In the next chapter, we are going to dive into the competing arguments for both of these theories, exploring the whispers and the scarce evidence that supported each one. But to truly understand the possibilities, we must first confront the most crucial piece of evidence that surfaced years later. The only known account from someone who claims to have seen what was under the black velvet. The terrifying and perhaps fabricated testimony of the maid. For 4 decades, the mask invited speculation. The community of New Orleans, from high society to the street vendors, was split. Was this a heartbreaking case of medical necessity, or was it the chilling evidence of a moral crime? The most charitable theory, and the one Dr. Laloire likely encouraged, was that his wife suffered from a catastrophic, untreatable physical disfigurement. People whispered of elephantiasis, a terrifying condition that caused extreme swelling and distortion of the face. Others speculated about a rare form of aggressive skin cancer that would have left her appearance unrecognizable and ghastly. The idea was simple. The mask was an act of mercy, shielding society from a horrifying sight and, more importantly, shielding Madame Laloire from the world's cruel pity. This theory is supported by Dr. Laloire's profession. As a respected physician, he had the perfect cover. Who would question a doctor taking extraordinary measures to protect his wife's dignity? It fits the paternalistic, controlling nature of 19th century medicine. However, this theory has major holes. First, medical historians argue that most known disfigurements of the era, while severe, did not necessitate total, lifelong seclusion. A veil or heavy makeup might suffice. A secured black velvet mask suggests something far beyond ordinary shame. Second, if the problem was purely medical, why the extreme secrecy around the diagnosis? Dr. Laloire could have published a clinical description, even an anonymous one, to satisfy the public and protect his wife's reputation. His absolute silence suggests the cure, or the truth, was more damaging than the disease itself. The opposing theory suggested the mask was not about a disease, but about identity and shame. One prominent speculation was that Madame Laloire was actually a political fugitive from France. The Laloire family had French roots, and the 19th century was rife with revolutions and exiles. Perhaps she was a member of a deposed royal or noble family, and her face was a wanted poster. If her true identity were revealed, it could lead to her extradition or the ruin of the entire Laloire dynasty. A far darker strain of the rumor suggested the mask hid not a political identity, but a criminal one. Did she commit a spectacular act of betrayal or violence before arriving in New Orleans? Was her face marked not by disease, but by a branded symbol placed by the authorities of another country? The extreme measures taken to conceal her suggest the punishment for exposure would be swift and severe. The crime theory is compelling because it provides a strong motive for Dr. Laloire's complicity. He wasn't just protecting her body, he was protecting his life, his family, and their freedom by hiding a dangerous secret. It turns the story from a tragedy into a cynical compact. Both theories were powerful, but for decades, they remained just that, theories. The central piece of evidence, the face itself, was permanently locked away. Historians, police, and journalists had to operate entirely in the shadows, drawing conclusions from the edges of the story, the thickness of the velvet, the drawn shutters, the doctor's quiet control. The mystery was a perfect circle. The mask created the rumors, and the rumors sustained the secrecy. Everything changed, however, years after Madame Laloire's death. A story emerged from the grave, passed down through the families of the Laloire's former servants. It was the account of Melanie, the housemaid, who claimed on her deathbed to have witnessed the truth. Her chilling testimony, whether fabricated or true, is the only known key to unlocking the mask, and it supports one theory over the other. What did the maid see? The answer lies in the most shocking chapter of this Louisiana mystery. For years, the Laloire mystery was nothing but conflicting theories, a medical tragedy versus a moral scandal. There was no proof, just rumor, perpetuated by the gatekeeper, Dr. Joseph Laloire. The only way the truth could escape the fortified walls of the mansion was through someone who had no power but ultimate proximity. Melanie, the housemaid. Melanie's story, which surfaced decades later, passed down through the Creole community, is the most critical piece of evidence we have. It's important to note that this account is disputed and wasn't recorded contemporaneously, but it offers the only direct glimpse beneath the black velvet. Melanie was one of the few servants entrusted with duties that brought her into the Laloire master suite. Her most terrifying duty was assisting Madame Laloire after the doctor was asleep, a time when the mask had to come off, if only briefly. One account states that on a sweltering summer night in the late 1850 seconds, Melanie was called to the room to bring ice water. She found the doctor sleeping, but Madame Laloire was awake. The maid stood frozen as she realized the room was not quite dark enough. In the weak glow of a dying fire, Melanie saw the terrifying spectacle. Madame Laloire was asleep, her back to the maid, but the mask was dangling from the bedside table. For the first and only time, the servant's fear was overcome by an overwhelming, primal curiosity. Melanie slowly, cautiously approached the bedside, trying to reconcile the elegant, wealthy woman of the house with the horror story she was sworn to keep. She only managed a single brief glimpse of the exposed face before the moment shattered. What Melanie saw, she would swear to on her deathbed, was not the work of disease. It was not a terrible tumor or a scar from fever. What she saw was something deliberately done, a mark of punishment, not illness. According to the maid, Madame Lalaure's face, some say her cheek, others her forehead, was heavily scarred and disfigured in a pattern, as though branded by human hands. The truth, she claimed, was that Madame Laloire was not hiding a sickness, but the visual evidence of a punishment. She was concealing the shame of a past life that the Laloire family had desperately tried to bury. This revelation instantly and dramatically shifted the narrative. The mask was not a veil of mercy, but a symbol of imprisonment. It confirmed the darker theory, the concealment of crime and shame. But what kind of crime results in a punishment so severe, yet so private? And why would Dr. Laloire, a man of standing in science, marry this woman and spend 40 years hiding her from the world? As convincing as Melanie's story is, it must be approached with scrutiny. It is a second-hand oral history, vulnerable to embellishment and distortion. Did the terror of the moment cause the maid to mistake a severe disfigurement for a brand? Was the story fabricated to provide closure where official records were silent? Yet, proponents of the crime theory argue that the story's central detail, that the truth was man-made, not natural, is too specific to be entirely false. It explains the doctor's total control, the fortress-like secrecy, and the shame that blanketed the household better than any medical diagnosis could. The maid's testimony provided the world with its first real suspect, the past. The mask concealed not a tragedy of nature, but a deliberate act of human cruelty. The question was no longer what she hid, but whose sins she bore. Was she the victim or the perpetrator? To answer that, we must leave the immediate mystery of the mask and look deeper into the Laloire family's origins. The truth, it seems, may not lie in New Orleans at all, but in the shadows of their French ancestry. It is there, in a legacy of betrayal, exile, and vengeance, that the story of the Iron Mask of Louisiana truly begins. The maid's account gave us a terrifying truth. The mask was hiding a punishment, not a disease. This revelation pointed away from local tragedy and toward a massive, dangerous secret that the Laloire family carried across oceans. To uncover it, we must trace their lineage back to France. The Laloires were part of the large wave of French Creoles who established themselves in Louisiana, many of them émigrés escaping the political and social upheaval of post-revolutionary France. And here, in the shadow of the French Revolution and its aftermath, lies the strongest motive for a brand or a permanent mark of shame. The late 18th and early 19th centuries in France were defined by swift and brutal justice. The revolution didn't just execute nobles, it employed branding and public shaming as punishment for crimes like theft, desertion, and, most notably, political treason. If Madame Laloire or her parents were involved in counter-revolutionary activities, a brand could have been the lasting mark of guilt. She might have been labeled an enemy of the Republic, a scar she would carry for life. That single mark could have forced her to flee France, taking with her the shame of betrayal. This would explain the mask's permanence. Even decades later, a French émigré recognizing that brand in New Orleans could have exposed her, creating a political scandal that would destroy her husband's career and reputation. The mask wasn't concealing a scar. It was concealing an international crime. Another, even darker theory suggests the betrayal wasn't political, it was personal. What if Madame Laloire had been married in France before, perhaps to a powerful or violent man. What if the branding was an act of revenge, a punishment inflicted by a husband whose pride she had shattered? In this version, Dr. Laloire becomes both savior and conspirator. He rescues her, yes, but by doing so, he inherits her curse. He builds a new life for her in New Orleans, but at the price of her freedom. His love becomes control, his devotion becomes imprisonment, and the mask becomes the physical embodiment of both his mercy and his dominance. The silence in the family records surrounding Madame Lalaure's early life lends chilling credibility to this. Her origins vanish into vagueness, birth dates missing, documents erased, and lineage obscured as if her history itself had been scrubbed clean before arriving in Louisiana. As decades passed, the Laloures maintained their silence. The Civil War came and went, generations changed. Yet the black velvet mask remained, an unyielding symbol of secrecy. By the 1890 seconds, it was no longer a scandal, it was a legend. Dr. Laloure died as a respected man, never speaking a word of the truth. Soon after, his veiled wife followed him into the grave. When Madame Laloire died, the authorities faced an impossible dilemma. By law, the deceased had to be identified before burial. But no one alive had seen her face in 40 years. The remaining relatives, distant and cautious, could not legally prevent the unmasking, but they pleaded for discretion. What happened in that final, private moment of unmasking remains one of the most haunting blanks in New Orleans history. No official record survives, no note from the mortician, no physician's report, no witness account. The city that had whispered about her for generations finally saw the truth and then collectively chose to erase it. Some historians argue this final silence supports the medical theory. Perhaps the disfigurement was so extreme, so grotesque, that officials simply respected the doctor's lifelong effort to preserve her dignity. Others insist the opposite, that the authorities recognized a mark of foreign punishment, a branded symbol of treason or shame, and deliberately buried the international scandal along with the body. What remains is not an answer, but a legend, the story of the Iron Mask of Louisiana. It became a Gothic parable about reputation, power, and the cost of secrecy. In the 19th century, a family's social image could outweigh truth itself, and love could become a weapon of concealment.